The banker didn't even look up from his ledger when he said it. Your husband's debts don't die with him, Mrs. Whitmore. The bakery is gone. Be out by Friday. No eye contact, no apology. Just a man with a pen deciding that a woman's entire life was worth less than the time it took to finish a sentence. Clara Whitmore walked out of that bank with $43, a cast iron skillet, and a town that had already made up its mind about her. Too large, too plain, too much of everything nobody wanted. They called her unwanted. They called her a burden. They had no idea what she was capable of. If this story moved something in you, hit like, drop the name of your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this journey has traveled, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The man didn't even look at her when he said it. That was the part Clara Whitmore would remember longest. Not the words themselves, though they were ugly enough, but the fact that Aldous Prentice kept his eyes on his ledger the entire time he spoke, like she wasn't worth the effort of eye contact, like she was something he was reading about rather than a person standing 3 feet in front of his desk. Your husband's debts don't die with him, Mrs. Whitmore. He turned a page. The bakery property reverts to the bank as of Friday. You'll want to be gone before then. Clara stood very still. The office smelled like pipe tobacco and wood polish, and outside the window she could hear the street sounds of Harlan, Wyoming, wagon wheels, someone calling to someone else, a horse's impatient stamp. All of it ordinary. All of it continuing without any awareness that her life had just been folded up and handed back to her like a piece of paper that hadn't worked out. I have invoices, she said. Customers who owe payment. If you give me 2 weeks... Friday, Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Prentice, the matter is settled. He finally looked up, and what was in his eyes wasn't cruelty exactly. It was something colder than cruelty. Indifference with a thin coating of patience. I suggest you speak to whatever family you have about arrangements. She didn't have family. He knew that. The whole town knew that. Harlan, Wyoming was not a large place, and Clara had lived in it for 6 years. And in those 6 years she had learned that a town this size knew everything about you and used most of it against you when the time came. She walked out of the bank without saying another word because there was nothing left to say. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click that felt louder than a gunshot. The street was cold for early November. Not yet the killing cold that would come in January and February, but the kind of cold that got into your coat and reminded you it was there. Clara walked 2 blocks before she realized she had no destination. She had been walking toward the bakery out of pure habit, the way your feet go somewhere your mind has already decided to leave. She stopped in the middle of the boardwalk. 2 women she recognized, wives of men who sat on the town council, were coming out of the dry goods store across the street. They saw her. She saw them see her. There was a brief, horrible moment where everyone knew what everyone was thinking, and then the women looked away and kept walking and spoke to each other in low voices that carried just far enough. Clara heard the word widow and the word unfortunate, and she did not hear whatever came after that because she turned and walked in the other direction. She had been hearing those words, or versions of them, for 11 months. Since Gerald died of a fever in December, quick and senseless, and without any particular drama except the drama of leaving her alone with a business she didn't own and a town that had never quite decided what to make of her. Gerald had been the acceptable face of the Whitmore bakery, cheerful, gregarious, known to everyone. Clara had been the one who actually did the baking, up before dawn every morning, flour to her elbows, making the bread and the pies and the sweet rolls that kept the business alive. But she had been the one in the back. Gerald had been the one at the front counter, shaking hands and laughing too loud, and making everyone feel like they'd wandered into a friend's kitchen. Without Gerald, the town had slowly, collectively, decided that the bakery was less appealing. And without the bakery, Clara was just a large, plain widow of 41, with no family and no clear purpose, and a face that had never made anyone stop and stare in the good way. She knew what they said. She'd known for years what they said, long before Gerald died. She had married Gerald Whitmore at 35, which was considered late, which meant people had already spent years deciding she was the kind of woman who didn't get chosen. And then she had gotten chosen, and that should have settled it. Except it hadn't, because then they simply shifted to saying she was the kind of woman who got chosen by a man like Gerald Whitmore, which was its own category of not quite right. Gerald had been small and thin and funny and kind. He had thought Clara was magnificent. He had said so regularly, without embarrassment, in a way that had made Clara uncomfortable at first, and then gradually had become the thing she organized her sense of self around. Not because she needed him to tell her. She had never been a woman who required that kind of constant reassurance, but because hearing it from someone who meant it had been like finding out a room in your house had a window you'd never noticed. He was gone. The window was boarded up, and now the bank was taking the bakery on Friday. She went back to the rooms above the bakery and sat at the kitchen table and counted what she had. It took less time than it should have. What she had was $43 and some cents, a canvas traveling bag, 2 changes of clothes, her rolling pin, her mother's bread knife, and a bone-handled cast-iron skillet that she had owned since she was 20 and which she was not leaving behind for any reason. She also had, though it wasn't something you could count, the knowledge of what she was good at. Clara Whitmore could cook. Not in the polite way people sometimes meant when they said that about a woman. She could cook in the real way, the way that fed people and kept them alive and made them feel, even when everything else was wrong, that they had something worth coming home to. She had been doing it since she was 8 years old, standing on a stool beside her mother in a Kansas farmhouse, and she had never once lost the thread of it. That was something. It wasn't 40 acres and a deed, but it was something. She spent that night packing and the next 2 days finding out what she already knew, which was that there was nothing for her in Harlan. She tried 3 different places. A boarding house that was full. A restaurant owner who said he already had kitchen help and didn't meet her eyes when he said it. A woman who ran a laundry who said she might have work in the spring, which meant no. On Thursday evening, the night before the bank would take the bakery, Clara Whitmore put her bag over her shoulder, picked up her skillet, and walked out of Harlan, Wyoming, heading west. She didn't look back. Not because she was being dramatic about it, simply because there was nothing behind her worth the effort of turning around. The road west from Harlan was not much of a road. It was more of a suggestion, wheel ruts in the earth, softened by frost, that indicated other people had gone this way before and had presumably survived the experience. Clara followed it because it was the only direction that felt like forward. She had $37 left after settling what small debts she could. She had a rough sense of where the next town was, a place called Dillon Creek, maybe 3 days walking, maybe 4. She had her coat, her bag, her skillet, and the knowledge that she had walked long distances before, and her feet were reliable. The cold was serious now, not threatening but present. Her breath made small clouds in the air. The sky above the open country was enormous and pale gray, and the wind came across the flats without anything to stop it. She walked through the first day without incident, unless you counted the incident of being completely alone in a landscape that didn't care about her at all, which she didn't because that was just weather. She made camp that first night in the shelter of an outcrop of rock, ate the biscuits she'd brought, wrapped herself in her blanket, and slept adequately, if not well. The second day was harder. Her feet began complaining around midday, and the cold got sharper toward afternoon, and she saw nobody. Not a wagon, not a rider, not another living person of any kind. Just the land and the road and the sky. She talked to herself sometimes when she was alone, and no one would hear, not out of loneliness exactly, but because it helped her think. She told herself about the bread she would make when she had a proper oven again, the process of it, step by step, the way the dough felt under your hands when the yeast had done its work, slightly warm, giving but with resistance, alive in a way that still struck her as close to miraculous after 30 years of doing it. By late afternoon of the second day, the temperature had dropped hard and fast in the way it did out here, like something had simply been turned off. Clara pulled her coat tighter and started looking for shelter, and found, after another mile of walking, a ranch, or what had been a ranch. The fence line was mostly down. The barn leaned at an angle that suggested it had been arguing with gravity for some time. The main house looked inhabited only in the technical sense. There was smoke coming from the chimney, which meant a fire, which meant someone. But the windows were dark except for a dim, flickering orange light that could have been a single lamp or a candle. And the yard between the gate and the door was strewn with things left where they'd fallen. A wagon wheel, a rusted harrow, a child's wooden toy half buried in the frost. Clara stopped at the gate, The sensible thing was to keep walking. This looked like a place that had been losing a long fight for a while, and people in the middle of long losing fights were not always glad to see strangers. Then she heard the crying. It wasn't dramatic crying, not wailing or screaming. It was the particular kind of thin, exhausted crying that children do when they have been at it for a while and don't have anything left to cry with except the automatic part of themselves that hasn't gotten the message yet to stop. The sound floated out through one of those dark windows, quiet and hopeless, and somehow more distressing for being quiet. Clara opened the gate. The yard was treacherous in the dark. She nearly caught her foot on the wagon wheel, and the porch steps creaked under her like they were considering giving out. She stood in front of the door for a moment, her hand raised, not entirely sure this was a good idea, and doing it anyway. She knocked. Silence. Then the shuffle of footsteps. Small footsteps. Light. Not an adult. Clara waited. The door opened 3 inches and stopped. In the gap appeared a face. A girl, maybe 10 or 11, with dark eyes and brown hair pulled back in an untidy braid that had been tidy a long time ago. She looked at Clara with an expression that wasn't afraid exactly, more like someone who had learned to assess strangers quickly out of necessity. "What do you want?" the girl said. The directness of it almost made Clara smile. Almost. "I heard crying," Clara said. I'm traveling. It's cold. I'm not looking for trouble." The girl's eyes moved from Clara's face down to the bag on her shoulder, then to the skillet she was carrying. Something in her face shifted. Not trust, not yet, but a recalculation. "That's Noah," the girl said. "He's hungry. We don't have much." "I have biscuits," Clara said. "Not many, but some. And I know how to cook if there's anything in the kitchen worth cooking." The girl looked at her for a long moment in that particular way children have of reading adults, the way they do it before they've learned yet to pretend they're not doing it. "Papa said not to let strangers in," she said. "That's good advice." "But Papa's asleep. He works the night to—" She stopped herself. Reconsidered. "He's tired." Clara didn't push. She waited. The door opened the rest of the way. The girl's name was Lily. The boy's name was Noah, and he was 6, and he was sitting on the floor in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days, hiccuping himself out of a crying spell with the mechanical determination of someone who couldn't remember what they'd been crying about but hadn't finished yet. He looked up at Clara when she came in with eyes that were red-rimmed and enormous, and then he looked at the biscuits she was already taking out of her bag, and his face did something complicated. "Are those for us?" he said. "If you want them." He wanted them. Lily stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, watching Clara move around the space with the guarded expression of someone who had been responsible for things they shouldn't have had to be responsible for, and wasn't sure yet if they could put that responsibility down. The kitchen was cold, the fire had burned low, and sparse in the way that meant not poor but careful but actually poor. The shelves had some dried beans, a partial sack of cornmeal, 2 tins of something she couldn't read in the dim light. There was a piece of salt pork that had been used down nearly to the rind. Clara didn't say anything about any of it. She built the fire up first because that was the most immediate thing, and then she found a pot and got water heating and started talking the salt pork into something it hadn't expected to become. "You're good at that," Lily said from the doorway. "I've had practice." "Where are you from?" "Town called Harlan, east of here." Lily considered this. "Why'd you leave?" Clara stirred the pot. "Nothing left for me there." "You don't have family?" "No." "Neither do we," Lily said. "I mean, we have Papa, but Mama died 2 years ago, and then everything got—" She stopped again. She had the habit of stopping herself mid-sentence, like she'd been trained to be careful about what she revealed, or had learned it on her own. "Hard," she finished. Noah, who had eaten his biscuits in approximately 4 bites and was now standing closer to Clara than he'd been a few minutes ago, said, "Mama made soup sometimes." "What kind?" Clara asked. He thought about it with enormous seriousness. "The kind that was hot." "That's my favorite kind too," Clara said. Something in him relaxed, the smallest amount, barely visible. He moved to stand directly beside her and looked into the pot with the concentrated attention of someone who needed very much to believe in what was in there. The soup was not remarkable. Salt pork and cornmeal and dried beans and some wild onion she found hanging near the door, not much of any of it. But it was hot, and it was real, and it filled the kitchen with a smell that had been missing from that room for a while. The smell of someone cooking because there were people to feed. She was ladling it into bowls when she heard the door. He filled the doorway the way big men do, not aggressively but completely, the kind of physical presence that comes from years of outdoor work, a body that had been made by labor rather than intention. He was somewhere around 40, with dark hair gone gray at the temples, and a face that had been handsome once and was still arresting in the way that faces are when they carry a lot of sustained weather and sustained grief. He was holding his hat in one hand, and he was exhausted in the bone deep, past the point of knowing, your exhausted way of someone who had been running on necessity for a long time. He saw Clara and stopped. The expression on his face moved through several things in quick succession: surprise, suspicion, alarm, and landed on a kind of controlled stillness that was worse than any of them, the stillness of a man who had learned to manage his reactions because unmanaged reactions cost too much. "Lily," he said. His voice was quiet and even. "Who is this?" "She heard Noah crying," Lily said. "She had food." "I asked who she is." "Clara Whitmore," Clara said. She had turned to face him but hadn't moved from the stove. "I was passing through. I'm a baker traveling west. I'm not a threat to you or your children." He looked at her for a long moment, not with the dismissive once-over she was used to from men, but actually looking, taking inventory of something. "This is my house," he said. "I'm aware of that. You don't have permission to be here." "Your daughter let me in. The boy was hungry." Clara gestured at the bowls. "The soup's done if you want it. I'll leave after." Another silence. Noah had retreated to Lily's side and was watching his father with the particular vigilance of a child who had learned to read adult moods the way other children learn to read primer books. The man, Ethan, she would learn his name was Ethan Calloway, looked at his children. He looked at the soup. He looked at the fire, which was burning better than it had been. He set his hat on the table. "Sit," he said. Whether he meant it for her or for the children wasn't entirely clear. It didn't matter. Everyone sat. He ate. The children ate. Clara ate the last of her biscuits and watched the kitchen fill with the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of something, of exhaustion and hunger and the slight cautious easing of both. "Where are you headed?" Ethan said. "Dillon Creek." "What's in Dillon Creek?" "I don't know yet," she said. "Work, if I can find it." He looked at her over his bowl. "What kind of work?" "Cooking, baking, whatever someone needs done." He said nothing. Noah, who had been leaning slowly sideways in his chair throughout this exchange, with the boneless inevitability of a child falling asleep, finally completed the journey and tipped against Lily's arm. Lily shifted to accommodate him automatically, the move of someone who had done it 100 times. Ethan watched this. Something moved through his face that he didn't try to hide, but didn't acknowledge either. "Road to Dillon Creek isn't safe in the dark," he said. "Temperature's dropping." Clara waited. "You can sleep in the barn," he said. "It's not comfortable, but it's out of the wind." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. I'm saying this once. You're a stranger, and I don't know you. And tomorrow morning, you'll be on your way." "Understood," Clara said. She meant it when she said it. She intended to be on her way. Achiki. She wasn't on her way. In the morning, she woke in the barn with the specific quality of early winter light coming through the cracks in the boards, and she lay there for a moment taking stock, stiff from the hay, cold, but not dangerously so. She could hear the animals, what there were of them. A cow, anxious and vocal. 2 horses. She got up and fed the cow because it was the obvious immediate thing, and she had always had a practical relationship with obvious immediate things. Then she found that the water trough had a thin skim of ice on it and broke that up. Then she went to see about the horses and found that they were thin. Not starved, but thin in the way animals get when the person feeding them has been too overwhelmed by other problems to get their rations quite right. She was carrying water to the second horse when Lily appeared in the barn doorway, wearing her coat over what looked like the same clothes she'd been wearing the night before, her braid even less tidy than it had been. "I thought you were leaving," Lily said. "I am," Clara said, "after I see to these horses." Lily came and stood beside her in the way she had of simply appearing next to someone without announcing it. She watched Clara work. "Papa doesn't always notice the horses," she said. "He's got too much other stuff. He's got a lot to manage. He had 3 ranch hands before. They all left when things got bad." Lily picked at a loose piece of wood on the stall. "After Mama died, Papa kind of—" She stopped. "You don't have to tell me," Clara said. "I want to," Lily said, which surprised them both a little. "He just kind of went away even though he stayed. You know? Like he was here, but he wasn't here." Clara knew exactly what she meant. She had known people who did that, people for whom grief had become a kind of interior weather that they moved around inside of while the exterior world went on without them noticing. "He came back some," Lily said, "but not all the way." Clara finished with the horse. She picked up the water bucket and stood there a moment looking at the barn. The disrepair of it, the things half done and left, the rope missing from one hook, the broken latch on the feed room door. None of it unfixable, all of it piled up. "Does your father know how to cook?" she asked. "Barely. He makes beans sometimes." "What do you eat mostly?" "Beans," Lily said, and said it so flatly that Clara had to look away for a second. She carried the bucket back and set it down. She looked at the house. She thought about Dillon Creek and whatever was or wasn't waiting for her there. "I'll make breakfast," she said, "before I go." Ethan Calloway was already at the table when she came in, drinking coffee that looked like it had been burned to sludge. He looked up at her with the wariness of a man who had expected her to be gone. "I said I'd make breakfast," Clara said. "I keep my word." He didn't say anything to that. He watched her move around his kitchen with an expression that was hard to read. Not hostile exactly, but guarded in the way of someone who has learned that things appearing in your life can disappear from it just as suddenly. And the calculation of whether to be glad about an appearing thing is complicated when you know what the disappearing part feels like. She made cornmeal porridge, which was the most she could do with what was there, and she salted it properly and put the last of her dried berries in it, which she had been saving but which seemed more useful here than wherever she was going. Noah came in while she was cooking. He walked straight to her side like he'd been doing it for years. "Same lady," he announced, apparently to the room. "Same lady," Claire confirmed. He watched her stir the pot with the serious attention of someone studying for an examination. Then he said, "Are you our new mama?" The kitchen went very quiet. Ethan's chair scraped back. "Noah, I'm just asking." "Don't." Noah subsided. He leaned against the cabinet and looked at the floor, his lower lip pushed out in the private way children have of registering objections they know not to voice. Clara served the porridge without commenting on any of it. She set the bowls down. She sat with them at the table and ate her own bowl and let the question hang in the air where it had been put, not touching it because it wasn't hers to answer. Ethan ate. He didn't speak. But somewhere in the middle of the meal, his eyes came up from his bowl and landed on his children. Noah eating with the focused determination of someone who has been hungry enough to take food seriously, Lily with her back straight and her chin up the way she always held herself, like she was braced for something. And something changed in his face. Not much. Just a small settling, like a board that had been under pressure being relieved of a pound or two. He finished his porridge. He pushed back from the table. He stood. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Clara's fine." He stopped. "Clara." He seemed to try the word out, see how it fit. "I've got a fence line down on the north side, takes me most of the day. The children are—" He stopped again. "I don't know how to ask this right." "You're asking if I'll stay with them today," Clara said. "I'd pay you. I don't have much, but—" "One day," Clara said. "I can do one day." He nodded, put his hat on, looked at his children one more time with that same quality of looking that contained more than it showed. "Don't give her trouble," he said to them. "I never give trouble," Noah said, which made Lily snort, which made Noah indignant, which was apparently so normal that Ethan was already out the door before it fully developed. Clara sat at the table and listened to the sound of his footsteps crossing the yard, and then she looked at the two children across from her, one watchful and careful, one already trying to slide his chair closer to hers without being obvious about it, and thought, one day would be enough. She was wrong about that. Not about staying one day, because that's what she told herself and it was what she intended. She was wrong about it being enough. She spent the day cleaning, not to make a point, not to prove anything. Just because cleaning was the obvious thing, and she was a person who responded to obvious things. The kitchen first, which had gotten away from Ethan in the way that kitchens do when no one has time for them, accumulated grease and grime working slowly into every surface. Then the front room, where a layer of general disorder had settled like silt. She moved things and swept under them and put them back where they seemed like they should go. And Lily followed her around for the first hour or so in that watchful way of hers before evidently deciding Clara wasn't going to do anything wrong, after which she started helping. Noah helped too, in the way 6-year-olds help, which meant he moved things from where they were to other places and called it assistance, and required supervision to prevent the assistance from becoming complication. "You don't have to do all this," Lily said, somewhere around midday. "It needs doing," Clara said. "Papa keeps saying he'll get to it." "I believe him," Clara said. "He just hasn't gotten there yet." Lily thought about this. "Do you think he will?" "Get there?" "Yeah?" Clara wrung out her cloth. She considered giving Lily a reassuring answer and decided against it because Lily was the kind of child who would know immediately when she was being handled, and handling her would cost whatever trust Clara had accumulated. "I think he's got more on his hands than one person can hold," she said. "And I think he's been holding it alone for a long time. Whether he gets there depends on whether that changes." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think things can get better when they've been bad for a long time?" "Yes," Clara said, without qualification, because that was the one thing she actually believed without uncertainty. Lily looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen it happen. Not as much as I'd like, but enough to know it's real." She went back to cleaning. After a moment, Lily picked up her cloth and went back to helping. When Ethan came in that evening, he stopped in the kitchen doorway the same way he had the night before. But this time what stopped him was different. The kitchen was clean. There was food cooking. Actual food, not just beans Clara had found enough in the cellar to work with when she went looking. The children were at the table, Noah drawing something on a scrap of paper and Lily reading from a battered primer. Ethan stood there for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "What happened?" "She cleaned everything," Noah said, not looking up from his drawing. "And then she made bread." Ethan's eyes found Clara at the stove. "I said one day," she said. "I kept my word." "The bread's not done yet," he said. The way he said it wasn't an accusation. It was something else. An observation, maybe. Or an opening disguised as an observation. "No," Clara said. "It's not." He hung his coat. He sat down. He watched his children at the table and his kitchen that was clean and the pot on the stove and the loaf taking shape in the pan. "You'll stay for the bread," he said. "I'll stay for the bread," she said. The loaf would take another hour. Outside, the temperature had dropped again. Lily looked up from her primer and caught Clara's eye across the kitchen and almost smiled. One day had already become 2. Neither of them mentioned it. The bread lasted 2 days. That was the practical fact of it. Clara had made a loaf, it had been eaten, and then there had been nothing to replace it with until she went to the cellar again and found the last of the winter wheat Ethan had been rationing since October. She used it without asking permission because asking permission felt like stalling, and stalling felt like something a person did when they weren't sure they were staying, and by the 3rd morning Clara had quietly stopped pretending she was leaving on any particular schedule. Ethan hadn't mentioned Dillon Creek again. She hadn't brought it up. It sat between them like an item neither of them wanted to pick up. What he had done on that 3rd morning was leave $2 more on the table before going out. No note. No conversation. Just the coins, placed where she would see them, which was its own kind of conversation if you were paying attention. She paid them into the household account she was keeping in her head. Feed for the horses, which were still too thin, cornmeal and dried beans from the supplies she'd inventoried in the cellar, a piece of salt pork from the smokehouse that still had some life in it if you worked it right. She fed the animals in the mornings because Ethan was already on the fence line or checking the herd by the time she woke, and because it was there to be done and her hands woke up before the rest of her and needed something to do. Noah followed her to the barn on the fourth morning without being invited. He showed up at her elbow in the way he had, just appeared like a small, silent weather event, wearing his coat misbuttoned and his boots on the wrong feet, carrying a wooden horse he'd been dragging around since the first night. "You missed a button," Clara told him. He looked down at his coat, looked back up at her. "I know," he said. "I can't reach the top ones." She buttoned his coat. He let her, holding himself very still the way children do when someone is doing something to them they want done but won't ask for. "Who usually does your coat?" she asked. "Lily, but she was still sleeping and I didn't want to wake her up because she gets tired." He said this without complaint, just as a fact he was managing. "She always gets up anyway, but she's tired. I can see it." Clara looked at him for a moment, 6 years old and already reading his sister's exhaustion and adjusting for it. That was a particular kind of growing up that happened when adults couldn't carry everything they were supposed to carry. "Lily does a lot," Clara said. "Yeah." He thought about it. "More than she should. That's what Mama used to say." He said it matter-of-factly, then looked away at the cow. "Can I give her the feed?" "You can try." "Hold out your hand flat." He tried. The cow, whose name Clara had established was Bess, and who had an opinion about everything, inspected Noah's hand with great deliberation before accepting the offering. Noah laughed, a short, surprised sound, like he'd forgotten how, and then immediately looked serious again, as if the laugh had caught him off guard. He kept his hand out long after the feed was gone, in case the cow wanted to do it again. She found the accounting book on the 5th day. She hadn't been looking for it. She was going through the small desk in the corner of the front room, looking for paper to write a supply list, and there it was under a stack of older papers. A ledger, battered, the entries in Ethan's square handwriting growing more erratic as the pages went on. She didn't read through all of it. She read enough. The Callaway Ranch had been profitable 3 years ago, then the drought year, then another bad season, then the loss of 2 of the 4 cattle pastures to a grazing dispute with a neighbor named Holt, who had more money to spend on lawyers than Ethan had to spend on lawyers. Then the ranch hands leaving, first one, then another, then the third, because when you couldn't pay them consistently, they went where they could be paid. Then Eleanor, Ethan's wife, had gotten sick in the spring 2 years back. And then Eleanor had died. After the entry that simply read Eleanor, May 14th, there was a gap of several weeks of no entries at all, and then the entries resumed, but they were different. Shorter, more mechanical, just numbers without any of the notes that had been in the earlier pages, like someone had switched from keeping a record to simply marking that days were still passing. Clara closed the ledger and put it back exactly where she'd found it. She sat at the desk for a minute, not doing anything, just sitting. Then she made her supply list and got back to work. The trouble with the town started on the 6th day. She had walked the 1.5 miles into the small settlement of Orrin Flats. She'd learned its name from Lily, who told her it with the neutral tone of someone reporting facts about a place they had a complicated relationship with, to buy what she needed from the general store. The general store was run by a man named Price, heavy-set and deliberate in his movements, who watched her come in from behind his counter with an expression she was well familiar with. Not hostility, just the particular careful attention of a man who was deciding what category to put her in. She told him what she needed. He got most of it. When she put her money on the counter, he looked at the coins and then looked at her. "You're the woman at the Callaway place," he said. "I'm staying there for a while, yes." He scratched the back of his neck. "Heard Callaway had someone out there. Didn't know what to make of it." "There's not much to make of it," Clara said. "He needed help with the children. I can cook." He packed up her purchases, pushed them across the counter. "Folks will talk, is all." "Folks usually do," Clara said. "I found that's more their problem than mine." She picked up her package and left. She was aware, without turning around, that there were 2 other people in the store, a woman browsing near the dry goods and a man she hadn't looked at directly. and that the quality of the silence behind her indicated they had heard the whole exchange. She walked back to the ranch in the cold with her package and the knowledge that by tomorrow, everyone in Orrin Flats would have an opinion about Clara Whitmore and the Callaway Ranch, and that most of those opinions would have more to do with what she looked like than with anything she'd actually done. She had been here before. She knew how it went. She made dinner and didn't mention the store. Oh, Ethan noticed anyway. Not that evening. He came in that night too tired for noticing anything except that there was food and a fire. But the next morning, when he was at the table with his coffee and she was starting the bread, he said, without looking up, "Price say something to you." It wasn't a question. He was polite, Clara said. Price is always polite. That's not what I asked. She kneaded the dough. He said people would talk. Ethan was quiet for a moment. And I told him that was more their problem than mine. She heard him exhale. Something between a laugh and a sound of resignation. That's going to make it worse, he said. Probably, Clara agreed. Another silence. Outside, Ajay was making noise about something, loud and indignant. Noah was still asleep. Lily had gone to check on the animals, which she did every morning before Clara could get there first, as if establishing that the task hadn't entirely left her hands. I can talk to Price, Ethan said. You don't need to do that on my account. I know I don't need to. He turned his cup around in his hands. I'm saying I can. Clara looked at him over her shoulder. He was looking at his coffee cup, jaw set in the particular way of someone who is offered a thing they're not entirely sure of and is waiting to see if it gets accepted. Thank you, she said. But talking to Price won't change what the town decides to think. That runs its own course. She turned back to the dough. I'd rather earn my own way through it. He said nothing else about it. But something in his posture shifted, a fractional unbending that she filed away without comment. Lily was the harder problem. Not because Lily was unkind, she wasn't, not even close. But she was careful in a way that was its own barrier, the way a well-built fence keeps things out even when it's not trying to. She helped Clara without being asked. She answered questions when asked. She was never impolite, and she kept a distance of about 3 feet, emotional, if not always physical, that she maintained with the precision of someone who knew exactly where the boundary was and what it was for. Clara understood. She didn't push. What she did instead was give Lily things to do that were real rather than invented. Not tasks designed to make her feel useful, but actual work that needed doing, offered without ceremony. When Clara was making the inventory of what they needed for winter, she asked Lily to go through the vegetable cellar and write down what was there, and Lily did it with the focused competence of someone who knew how to take a job seriously. When the roof over the lean-to was leaking, Clara said she was going to get up and patch it, and Lily, without being asked, went and got the ladder. She was up there with her, both of them on the lean-to roof with the cold wind coming in sideways, when Lily said, "Why do you stay?" Clara was pressing pitch into the leak with the flat of her palm. "Because there's work here." "You could find work in town." "Maybe. I mean," Lily stopped, repositioned herself on the roof. "I'm not saying you should leave. I just don't understand why you stay somewhere nobody asked you to stay." Clara sat back on her heels. The wind moved her hair and she pushed it back and looked at the gray sky and then at Lily, who was watching her with that direct, assessing gaze. "I knocked on your door," Clara said. "Your father didn't throw me out. That felt close enough to an invitation." "That's not a reason." "No," Clara admitted. "It's not the whole reason." Lily waited. "The whole reason," Clara said slowly, because she was working it out as she said it, "is that I've spent most of my life going to places where I was supposed to fit and not fitting. And I came here not supposed to fit, and somehow She stopped. "The work makes sense here. I don't know how else to say it." Lily looked at the roof, pressed her own piece of pitch into a smaller crack beside the main one. "Mama fit here," she said. She was the kind of person who just fit everywhere. "That's a rare thing," Clara said. "Yeah." Lily's jaw tightened. She died anyway. The bluntness of it sat in the air between them. Clara didn't try to soften it. "Yes," she said. "She did." Lily looked at her. "Does that mean fitting doesn't matter? Like, people leave anyway?" "I think people leave no matter what. That part's going to happen regardless." Clara chose her words carefully. I don't think that means fitting doesn't matter. I think it means you fit while you're here, and that's what you've got. Lily was quiet for a while. The wind pushed. Below them, faintly, they could hear Noah talking to the horses in the barn, a running monologue about something the way he did when he thought no one was listening. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said. I want you to know that. I know what I am, and I know what she was, and those are two different things. Lily looked down at her hands. I know, she said. After a moment, I know you're not. They came down from the roof. The patch held, mostly. Clara called that good enough. You're right, Tom. Ethan found her out at the fence line on the 8th day. She hadn't meant to go out there. She had gone to the barn to check on a horse that had been off its feed, and then she had walked north to see the fence line Ethan mentioned, just to see what it looked like. And what it looked like was about 200 yards of posts that had been repaired with materials that weren't quite right for the job. It was holding, but only because it hadn't been tested yet. She was looking at it when she heard him behind her. He pulled up on his horse and looked down at her standing beside his fence, with her arms crossed. And he didn't say anything for a moment. What do you see? He asked. I see fence posts that were repaired with green wood. It'll shrink when it dries and the tension will go out of the wire, she pointed. That section there is already starting. He looked where she pointed. He swung down from the horse, walked over and put his hand on the post she'd indicated, tested it. The post shifted. He said something under his breath that she didn't ask him to repeat. How long? He said. Before it goes? This winter, if there's a hard freeze. Maybe spring, if you're lucky. He stood there with his hand still on the post, looking at the fence line. She could see him calculating. Cost, labor, time, all the things this ranch needed and all the things there weren't enough of to meet those needs. I can help you with this, she said. I've strung fence before. My father ran cattle. He looked at her. It was the look she was getting used to, the one where he was reassessing something he thought he'd already figured out. You grew up on a ranch, he said, until I was 18. Then the ranch was sold for debts, and I went to cook for a family in Cheyenne. She shrugged. I've done a lot of different things. Seems like it. The wind moved through the grass. He was still looking at her, and she was looking at the fence. And the silence was the kind that contained things neither of them was ready to put into words. It's too cold today, he said finally, but if the weather holds Tuesday, I could use another set of hands. Tuesday then, she said. He mounted his horse. He was about to turn back toward the ranch when he stopped, didn't quite turn to look at her. Clara. Yes. He seemed to consider several things. The children. Noah, especially. He stopped again. He's not had much stability. I need you to understand that if you're going to leave, I'd rather you were clear about when, because when you go, it'll... He left the sentence where it was. I understand, Clara said. Do you know when you're going? She looked at the fence. She looked back at him. No, she said honestly. I don't. He nodded, not satisfied by that, but accepting it. He rode back toward the ranch, and Clara stood at the broken fence line in the cold and thought about Tuesday. But Tuesday came and the weather held and they worked the fence together all morning. It was hard physical work, pulling wire and driving posts, and the specific misery of working with metal in cold air when your hands go numb and you make mistakes you wouldn't make in July. Ethan worked quickly and without much conversation, which suited Clara fine because she worked the same way. But somewhere in the middle of the morning, when they were stretching a new run of wire and needed 4 hands to do it right, they fell into a working rhythm together that was easier than it had any right to be. He anticipated what she was going to do before she did it. She handed him things without being asked. The coordination of it was wordless and efficient and slightly startling to both of them. During the break for coffee, from the thermos Lily had made and sent with them, which made Ethan go still for a moment when Clara pulled it out, because it was the kind of thing Eleanor had done, the kind of small provision that had been missing, he sat on a fence post and looked out over the north field. This land was good land once, he said. It can be again, Clara said. He looked at her sideways. You don't know that. I know what the fence looks like when it's fixed, she said. I know the horses are getting their weight back. I know the cellar has more in it than it did 10 days ago. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I can't fix the drought or the neighbor with the lawyers, but the things that can be fixed are getting fixed. He was quiet for a while. You sound very sure of yourself. I'm sure about the things I can see, she said. I'm not sure about anything else. He looked at his coffee. I made mistakes, he said. After Eleanor, He stopped, started again. I knew the ranch was going under and I couldn't find a way to care about it. I just couldn't get myself to care. I know, Clara said. You read the ledger, he said. It wasn't an accusation. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for paper. I know. He turned his cup around. It doesn't matter. There's nothing in there I'm proud of. There are 8 years of entries before the gap, Clara said. Everything up to that point looks like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He looked up. The gap wasn't weakness, she said. It was grief. Those are different things. She set her cup down. You came back to it. A lot of people don't. It was very still. Then he said gruffly, We should get back to the wire. Yes, Clara said. We should. They got back to the wire. It was Noah who broke something open, the way small children sometimes do without knowing they're doing it. He had taken to following Clara in the evenings, after dinner, in the hour before bed. Not talking necessarily. Just being nearby, carrying his wooden horse, sitting on the kitchen floor while she cleaned up, occasionally asking questions that had no particular connection to each other. Why did bread rise? Was Bess the cow happy? What did snow taste like if you caught it on your tongue? Clara answered all of them seriously, which seemed to be what he needed. Not to be managed or redirected, but to be taken at face value. His questions worth the trouble of a real answer. On the 9th night, he climbed up onto the kitchen chair and watched her put the pots away and said, in his matter-of-fact way, I don't remember Mama's face very good anymore. Clara set down the pot she was holding. I try to remember it, he said, but it keeps getting blurry. Lily said I should look at the picture, but the picture doesn't move and Mama's face moved. When she talked, it moved. Faces do that, Clara said carefully. Does that mean I'm forgetting her? She came and sat in the chair next to him. He was looking at his wooden horse, turning it over in his hands. I think you remember the things that mattered, she said. The way she moved, the way she talked. Those are harder to hold on to because they were alive, but they're in you somewhere. Are you sure? As sure as I am about anything, she said. He considered this with the grave seriousness of a 6-year-old. I remember she smelled like the soap with the yellow box, he said. And she sang when she was doing things, but she didn't think she could sing, so she only did it when she thought no one was listening. Those are good things to remember, Claire said. Yeah. He was quiet. Do you think she'd be mad that you're here? Clara took a breath. I don't know. I didn't know her. I think she wouldn't be mad, Noah said. I think she'd be glad Noah got someone to button his coat. He said it in a different voice, slightly, playing the role of someone thinking out loud in a way that made Clara realize with a small internal lurch that he was doing an impression of himself, seeing himself from the outside with a clarity she hadn't expected. She didn't trust herself to say anything for a moment. You're a very perceptive person, Noah, she said. He looked at her. What does perceptive mean? It means you see things clearly. He thought about this. Okay, he said, and got down from the chair and went to find Lily to be put to bed. Clara sat at the kitchen table alone for a few minutes. From somewhere in the house she could hear Lily's voice, low and patient, doing whatever she did at bedtime that had been her job since she was 9 years old. She could hear Noah's voice responding, shorter bursts, the conversation winding down. Then Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd been somewhere in the back of the house. She'd heard him moving around but hadn't seen him. He looked at her sitting at the table and then at the doorway the children had gone through. He talked to you, Ethan said. He talks to me most evenings. About Eleanor. About her face, Clara said. He's afraid he's forgetting it. Ethan's jaw worked. He came and sat down at the table, across from her, and for a moment he just sat there with his hands flat on the table, not moving. He never said that to me, he said. He might not have wanted to upset you. He's 6 years old, Ethan said. He shouldn't be managing my feelings. No, Clara said. He shouldn't. The honesty of it landed. He didn't flinch from it. I've made it hard for them, he said, being the way I've been. You've been grieving, Clara said, and keeping this place alive at the same time. That's a lot. It's still no excuse for... I'm not excusing anything, Clara said. I'm describing what happened. Those are different things. He looked at her. In the lamplight, his face was tired but present in a way it hadn't been the first night. More there, more behind his eyes. You don't smooth things over, he said. No. Eleanor used to smooth things over. I know, Clara said. Lily told me. He made a sound, half laugh, half something else. Lily talks to you. Some. She doesn't talk to almost anyone. I noticed. He sat back, rubbed his face with both hands. What do you want, Clara? I mean, he dropped his hands. You stayed. You're still here. What do you actually want out of this? She thought about how to answer that honestly. Right now, I want this ranch to not fall apart. I want your children to eat regularly and sleep without worrying. She paused. I want to be somewhere I'm useful. That's not a small thing for me. And after that? I don't know, she said. I've stopped making plans past Tuesday. Something moved across his face. Not amusement exactly, but something close to it. That's a short horizon. It's the one that's been working, she said. He stood up. He was going to say something, she could see him forming it, and then he changed his mind and said something else instead. I'm glad you came in from the cold that first night. He said it quietly, without making anything of it, and then he went to say goodnight to his children, and Clara sat at the table with that sentence and turned it over the same way Noah turned over his wooden horse. Not sure what it meant exactly, just sure it was worth the turning. Outside the wind was building again, the way it did here, arriving without announcement. The lamp on the table held its small circle of warmth against the dark. She was still at the table when Ethan came back through and said goodnight. She said goodnight back. After a while, she banked the fire and went to the room he'd given her, the small room off the kitchen that had been a storage room and was now a room with a cot and a hook for her coat. And she lay in the dark and listened to the wind trying the house. The house held. That was not nothing. The house held. Marcus Calloway arrived on a Thursday, which was the day Clara made pie. She had found a cache of dried apples in the back of the cellar that she'd missed on her first inventory. A whole crate of them, still good, packed in straw by someone who had known what they were doing. Eleanor, almost certainly. The kind of quiet provision a woman makes when she's thinking about winter and the people who will need to get through it. Clara had stood in the cellar holding one of those dried apples for a long moment before she carried the crate upstairs. The pie was in the oven when the horse came into the yard. Noah heard it first. He was on the floor with a collection of rocks he'd been sorting by some classification system that only made sense to him, and he looked up and then went to the window in the quick, alert way he had when something changed in the yard's rhythm. Someone's coming, he said. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and came to look. The rider was coming in from the South Road. Not from Orrin Flats, but from the direction of the larger county seat 12 miles out. He was well mounted, which was the first thing she noticed, and well dressed for the territory, which was the second. He rode like a man who was used to arriving places and having that arrival mean something. Lily came in from the back, saw them both at the window, came to look. She went still. That's Uncle Marcus, she said. Her voice was careful in the way voices get when they're not sure yet what to feel. Does he come often? Clara asked. He used to. Lily watched him ride into the yard. Not since last spring. He and Papa had a, she chose her word, disagreement. About what? Lily looked at her sidelong. About whether Papa could manage the ranch. A pause. Uncle Marcus thought he should sell. The rider dismounted in the yard. He was younger than Ethan by several years. Clara could see that now. With the same dark coloring but assembled differently, the lines of his face quicker and less weathered. A man who had spent his time in offices and courtrooms rather than in fields. He tied his horse at the post and looked at the house. Then he looked at Clara through the window. She stepped back from it without hurrying. Go tell your father, she said to Lily. Papa's at the south pasture. Then go get him. Lily went. Squad. Marcus Calloway was perfectly civil when he came through the door. That was the first thing Clara learned about him, that his manners were impeccable in the way that some people's manners are a form of control rather than consideration. He took off his hat. He said good afternoon. He looked around the kitchen, clean, warm, smelling of apple pie, with an expression of mild, calibrated surprise that told her he had been expecting something worse and was revising his position but not abandoning it. You must be the woman my brother took on, he said. Clara Whitmore, she said. Can I offer you coffee while you wait for Ethan? Please. He sat at the table without being invited to, which was not rudeness exactly, but was a kind of claiming. Noah had retreated to the far side of the kitchen and was watching him with wide eyes. Marcus glanced at him. Noah, you've gotten tall. I'm the same height, Noah said with the literal-minded certainty of a 6-year-old. Relatively speaking, Marcus said, and smiled the smile of a man who found children faintly amusing in the way you found unpredictable weather amusing. Interesting to observe, not something you'd choose. Clara poured coffee and set it down and didn't sit. She had things to do, and she went back to doing them, which had the effect of making the kitchen feel like her territory, rather than somewhere she was waiting on his convenience, and she was aware that this was deliberate and didn't particularly apologize for it. He watched her move around the kitchen. How long have you been here? He asked. Coming up on 3 weeks. And before that? Harlan. He turned his cup. You're a widow, I take it. I am. And you were, what, passing through? I was traveling west, she said. I stopped when there was a reason to stop. And the children were the reason. She looked at him over her shoulder. The children needed someone. I was there. It seemed like the right thing. He said again, which was becoming a sound she didn't trust. He picked up his coffee and regarded her with a pleasantness that had a question inside it. You're planning to move on eventually, I assume. I haven't set a date, Clara said. But you understand this is a temporary arrangement. She turned to face him fully. I understand that I'm here, and that the children are fed, and the fence line is repaired, and the horses have their weight back. Whether that's temporary is something Ethan and I would discuss, not something that's been decided. The pleasantness thinned a little. Not much, just enough to see what was underneath it. Of course, he said. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. He said it in the tone of a man who had meant exactly that, but was tactful enough not to confirm it. The pie came out of the oven. Clara set it on the rack to cool and didn't offer him any. Ethan came in 20 minutes later with Lily half a step behind him. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at his brother the way you look at something you weren't expecting to have to deal with today. Marcus. Ethan. Marcus stood and the two men looked at each other across the kitchen in the particular way of brothers who know each other too well and have argued too recently. You look better than I expected. You expected bad, Ethan said. Last time I was here. Last time you were here, you told me to sell the ranch, Ethan said. He said it without heat, just fact, like a man who has made peace with the memory of an argument, even if he hasn't made peace with what was said. Come out to the porch, we'll talk. We can talk here, Marcus said. I don't mind company. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at her pie. I'll take the children out to check on Bess, she said, and she meant it as an exit that gave them privacy, and she saw Ethan register that and give the smallest nod. She took Noah by the hand. He came without protest, curious about Bess, always curious about Bess. And Lily followed of her own accord, though she paused at the door and looked back at her uncle with an expression Clara couldn't fully read. Outside, the cold air came in sharp after the warm kitchen. Noah wanted to go straight to the barn. Clara let him lead the way, and while he went to find Bess, she stood near the barn door where the wind wasn't quite as cutting and listened to the sound of her own breathing and the very faint sound through the walls of the house of two men talking. She couldn't hear the words. She didn't need to. Lily came and stood beside her. He's going to say she should go, Lily said. Clara looked at her. He's going to say it politely, Lily said, but that's what he's going to say. He said the same thing about Mabel Henderson after Mama died. She came to help for 2 weeks and Uncle Marcus came and said it wasn't appropriate for a woman to be here alone with Papa, and she left the next day. Lily's voice was flat and controlled. She was nice. She made good soup. What did your father say about it when she left? Lily shrugged. He didn't say anything. He never does. She picked at the barn door frame. That's the thing about Papa. He doesn't argue with people. He just goes silent, and that means they win. Clara absorbed this. In the barn, she could hear Noah explaining something to Bess in great detail. The explanation appeared to involve the rock classification system, which Bess was receiving with her characteristic patience. How old were you when Mabel Henderson left? Clara asked. 9. And you had to go back to managing things yourself. I didn't mind, Lily said in the tone of someone who had told themselves that enough times for it to have become half true. Clara looked at her. This girl who was 11 years old and held herself like someone twice that, and who had been filling in for adults since she was 9, doing it competently and without complaint and at a cost she hadn't started to count yet because counting it would mean admitting it was a cost. You should have minded, Clara said. It was too much for a 9-year-old. Lily's jaw tightened. I managed. I know you did, Clara said. That's not the point. Lily looked at her. What is the point? The point is that managing something you shouldn't have to manage is its own kind of hard, even when you're good at it. Especially when you're good at it. Because when you're good at it, nobody notices you're still a child doing it. The silence that followed was the kind that had something moving around in it. Lily looked away at the cold yard. He's going to say you should leave, she said again. More quietly this time. Maybe, Clara said. Are you going to? Clara turned the question over. It was a fair question, and it deserved a real answer, not a managing one. I don't know yet what your father's going to say about it, but I'll tell you this. Nobody has run me off from somewhere I've decided to be since I was 23 years old, and Marcus Calloway doesn't strike me as anyone who could change that record. Lily looked back at her. For the first time in 3 weeks, the distance that she kept, that careful, maintained 3 feet of emotional reserve, shifted. It didn't disappear, but it shifted, like a door that hadn't been opened, moving slightly in a wind. Okay, Lily said. Just that. Okay. Noah appeared in the barn doorway with straw in his hair. Bess knows about the rocks, he announced. She's interested. Is she? Clara said. Very, he confirmed, and went back inside. Marcus stayed for dinner, which Clara had expected. He was not the kind of man who left before he'd accomplished what he'd come to accomplish, and the dinner table was a place where things could be said with the cover of ordinary company. He was gracious at the table. He talked to Ethan about county matters, about a man named Alderman, who was expanding his holdings on the eastern side of the valley, about the price of beef relative to last year. He asked Lily about her studies and the way adults ask children about things they don't actually want to hear the answer to, and then nodded pleasantly while she answered without really tracking what she said. He didn't talk to Noah much, which Noah was fine with because he was busy conducting a private comparison of the pie he was eating to all other pies he had experienced, and the verdict, rendered solemnly to Clara at the end of it, was that this was the best one. Better than the one at the harvest supper? Lily asked, skeptically. That one had more sugar, Noah said. This one has more apple. I prefer more apple. That's a very specific preference, Marcus said pleasantly. I'm a specific person, Noah said, which was so exactly true that Clara pressed her lips together to keep a straight face. Ethan, across the table, caught her expression. The corner of his mouth moved. After dinner, Marcus helped clear the table, which surprised her. He did it efficiently and without being asked, which told her he wasn't a man who was unaware of how things ran. Just a man who had decided how this particular situation should run and was working toward it. Clara washed up and Lily dried, and Ethan and Marcus went back to the porch, and this time they were out there long enough that Clara had finished the kitchen and started the bread for morning before she heard the door. She heard Ethan's voice first, then Marcus's, back and forth. The cadences of an argument kept at a civil volume. She couldn't hear the words. Then the voices stopped, and there were footsteps, and Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at her at the counter, her hands in the bread dough, and he said, "May I speak frankly?" "I'd prefer it," Clara said. He came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter on the other side of the room with his arms crossed, not aggressive but certain, a man who knew what he was about to say and had organized it. "You've done good work here," he said. "I can see that. The children look better than they did in spring. The house is in order. I'm not dismissing what you've brought to this situation." "But," she said, "but this isn't a sustainable arrangement." He kept his voice even. "Ethan is a widower with 2 children and a struggling ranch. You're a woman traveling alone with no family connections and no particular ties to this area. The town already has opinions. Those opinions will harden into something that affects his ability to do business here, to sell cattle, to maintain relationships he needs." He paused. "You understand that a man in his position can't afford to be talked about." Clara kept her hands in the dough. "What the town says about a man who is raising his children and running his ranch is the town's problem to manage, not his." "That's a fine principle," Marcus said. "It works less well in practice when the man who owns your promissory note at the bank decides your collateral is worth less because of what his wife told him at church." He was not wrong about that part. She knew it, and he knew she knew it. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm pointing out the reality of the situation and suggesting that a woman of your evident good sense might see the practical wisdom in leaving before I'm asked to." He met her eyes. "In finding a situation that's more appropriate to your circumstances. There are households that need cooks, towns with bakeries. You have skills that are in demand." "I'm aware of my skills," she said. "Then you're aware that you have options that don't involve—" He paused, choosing carefully. "Complicating a man's life who already has more complications than he can handle." The word complicating settled into the room like a stone into water. Clara looked at her hands in the dough. She thought about Lily on the roof pressing pitch into cracks. She thought about Noah and his memory of a face that moved. She thought about Ethan at the fence post with his hand on the shifting wood, recalculating. "I appreciate your honesty," she said. "I'll give you mine. I'm not here to complicate anything. I'm here because there was work that needed doing, and I could do it. Whether I stay past the point where I'm useful is a conversation I'll have with Ethan, not with you." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he was measuring, he seemed to arrive at a number he didn't entirely like. "Ethan doesn't always know what's good for him," he said. "Maybe not," she said, "but he's the one who lives here." Marcus put his hat on. "Good night, Mrs. Whitmore." "Good night, Mr. Calloway." He went out. She heard him speak briefly with Ethan on the porch, something short, not an argument, a sign-off, and then the sound of his horse. She finished the bread dough and covered it to rise and stood at the kitchen counter in the quiet. Ethan came in from the porch. He didn't say anything immediately. He poured himself the last of the coffee and stood at the stove with it, not drinking. "He told you to send me away," Clara said. "He suggested it." "And?" Ethan set his cup down. He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was one she hadn't seen from him before. Not the guarded calculation of their early days, not the slow opening of the past week. Something more direct. Something that had decided. "He's not wrong about the town," Ethan said. "I know. The bank situation is real. Holt already has aldermen talking about the eastern pasture land, and if the bank decides to call in the note early—" He stopped. "There are practical considerations." "Yes, but—" He looked at her. "The children are better, the ranch is better, and I—" He stopped again in the way he always stopped when he got to the thing underneath the thing. "I'm better than I was." Clara waited. "I'm not good at asking for things," he said. "I'm not built for it, and what I'm about to say is going to come out wrong, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's intended." He looked at the cup, then back at her. "Don't go because Marcus told you to. If you go, go because you want to, but don't go because of him." She stood at the counter, looking at him and thinking about Marcus's word, complicating, and about all the places she had moved on from over the years, some by choice, and some because staying had been made impossible in ways both obvious and subtle. She thought about what she'd told Lily on the roof. "You fit while you're here, and that's what you've got." "I'm not going because of Marcus," she said. Something loosened in him that he'd been holding tight. "I do need to talk to you about something," she said. "About the arrangement." "Go ahead." "I don't want to be here on sufferance," she said. "Your brother thinks I'm a temporary fix, and the town thinks I'm a curiosity, and that's fine. I can't control what they think, but I need to know that I'm here because you and the children want me here, not because you haven't gotten around to asking me to leave." "I haven't asked you to leave," he said. "You also haven't said the opposite." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I want you here. The children want you here." He said it simply, without ornamentation, in the voice he used when he was being most honest. "I should have said that before now." "Yes," she said, "you should have." He almost smiled. "I told you I was bad at this." "You did," she said. "I'm willing to account for that." He picked up his coffee cup. "Are you staying?" "I'm staying," she said. He nodded, drank the cold coffee without making a face about it because he was the kind of man who drank cold coffee and accepted it as the cost of having let it sit. He said goodnight. She said goodnight. And after he left the kitchen, she stood there for a moment and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, not security. Those were too large and too fragile. Just the specific small rightness of a thing that was where it was supposed to be. The town's opinion arrived formally the following Saturday. She had gone into Orrin Flats with the wagon to get supplies, with Lily alongside her because Lily wanted to return a book to the woman, Mrs. Greer, who had been loaning her primers since Eleanor died. It was a small errand, and Clara hadn't thought much of it. She was outside the general store loading flour into the wagon when she became aware of a silence behind her that had teeth. There were 3 women on the boardwalk. Clara knew one of them by sight, the wife of the man who ran the feed operation, a narrow-faced woman named Doris Shefford, who had the look of someone who kept careful track of other people's business as a form of recreation. The other 2 Clara didn't know, but the way they were arranged, slightly angled toward her, talking in voices just low enough to technically not be directed at her, meant they wanted to be heard without having to own what they were saying. She caught Callaway Ranch, and Widow Woman, and Not Fitting, and something she didn't catch that made 2 of them press their lips together in that way people do when they're trying not to look pleased. Lily was still inside with Mrs. Greer. Clara finished loading the flour, then she turned around. "Mrs. Shefford," she said. The 3 women looked at her. The suddenly being addressed look crossed their faces, the slight reset that happens when you've been speaking about someone and they acknowledge it. "Mrs. Whitmore," Doris Shefford said, recovering smoothly. "I hear there's talk about me working for the Callaway Ranch," Clara said. She kept her voice pleasant and direct. "I'm sure it's well-intentioned. If there are any questions about the arrangement, I'd rather answer them directly than have them go through channels." She looked at all 3 of them in turn. "Is there anything you'd like to ask me?" Silence. The particular silence of women who are accustomed to talking and are not accustomed to the subject talking back. "I think we understand the situation," Doris Shefford said. "I'm glad," Clara said. "Then we all know where we are." She turned back to the wagon and finished tying down the load. Her hands were steady. The flush in her face was her own business. Lily came out of the store a minute later and climbed up onto the wagon seat and looked at the 3 women on the boardwalk and then at Clara. "What did you say to them?" she said. "Nothing much." Lily looked at the women again. Something about her expression said she had heard more than Clara thought from inside the store. "Papa needs to say something," she said. "It's not his job to—" "I know it shouldn't be," Lily said. "But this is his town. These are the people he has to do business with. If he says nothing, they'll think he agrees with them." She looked at Clara with the direct clarity she had. "That would be worse, for you and for us." It was sound reasoning. Clara flicked the reins. "That's between your father and himself," she said. "You could tell him that." "He knows," Clara said. "He'll decide what to do about it." Lily said nothing else until they were out of town, and then she said, "I hope he does the right thing." "Me too," Clara said. She meant it the way you mean a thing when you're not sure you have any control over whether it happens. That evening she was in the kitchen when she heard Ethan come in from the barn with a different energy than usual, something compressed about the way he moved, a decision carried close. He came to the kitchen doorway. "I heard what happened in town," he said. She waited. "Haggerty at the feed store told me." He leaned against the doorframe. "He said you handled yourself fine. He also said Doris Shefford has been talking to anyone who'll listen, and that includes Patterson at the bank, which is—" He stopped, pressed his mouth together. "Which is a problem I need to deal with." "You don't have to deal with anything on my account," she said. "I know I don't have to," he said, using almost exactly what she'd said to him 3 weeks ago, which she clocked and thought he probably didn't realize. "Ethan, you're not a burden on this ranch," he said. "You're the reason the ranch is still functioning. Anyone who wants to have an opinion about that is going to hear me say that out loud." She looked at him. He said it with the particular conviction of a man who has made a decision and stopped second-guessing it, and she was not going to take that from him. "All right," she said. "All right," he said, like an agreement, like a door closing on one thing and opening on another. He came in and sat at the table. She went back to the stove. Noah came in from somewhere trailing straw and a new rock, and Lily came in from wherever she'd been, and the kitchen filled with the sound of the family and its evening routine, ordinary and specific, and for the first time in a long time in this house, not quite so thin. Clara kept her back to the room because she needed a moment that was just hers. She stood at the stove and turned a spoon in the pot and felt, underneath the warmth of the kitchen and the noise of the children and the quiet, solid presence of the man at the table, the particular sensation of a person who has stopped waiting to be asked to leave. She didn't have his name. She didn't have a deed. She didn't have anything that the law or the town or Marcus Calloway would call settled. What she had was this kitchen and these people in it, and the knowledge that she had not backed down, and that she had been told, simply, without performance, that she was wanted here. She had started with less. She had built things from less. She stirred the pot and listened to Noah telling his father about the rock, and his father's voice low in response, and Lily setting the table with the clatter and efficiency of someone who had been doing it so long it was automatic. And she thought, this is not nothing. This is not nothing at all. Ethan left for town Monday morning before the sun had fully committed to rising. Clara heard him in the kitchen while it was still dark. The specific sounds of a man moving quietly in a house where other people were sleeping, the careful setting down of a boot, the low sound of the stove being stoked. She lay in her room off the kitchen and listened and didn't get up. He hadn't asked her to come, and she understood that this was something he needed to do in his own way, without an audience, without the weight of her watching him do it. She heard the door close. She heard his horse cross the yard, then silence, and the sound of the wind, and after a while she got up and built the fire and started the day. The children came down to a kitchen that was warm and smelled of coffee and biscuits, and if they noticed that their father was gone early and had taken his good coat, neither of them said so directly. Noah ate with his usual focused attention. Lily ate less than usual and kept glancing at the door. "He'll be back by midday," Clara said. Lily looked at her. "You don't know that." "No," Clara said, "but it's a reasonable guess." Lily pushed the last of her biscuit around her plate. "What if it goes badly?" Define badly. What if Patterson at the bank says something, or Doris Shefford's husband? He's on the town council, and he has opinions about— She stopped. "About everything." "Then your father will deal with that too," Clara said. "He doesn't always—" Lily stopped again. "Say what you're going to say," Clara told her. Lily looked at her plate. "He doesn't always fight back. He lets people talk and he goes quiet, and then later he's—" She searched for the word. "Smaller, like the talking took something out of him." Clara had noticed this too. It wasn't weakness exactly, more the particular way some people absorb conflict internally instead of expelling it outward, and the internal absorption had a cost that showed in the set of the shoulders, the heaviness around the eyes. "He told me he was going," Clara said. "He made that decision on his own. That's different from being pushed." "Is it enough?" "I don't know," Clara said. "We'll see when he comes back." Lily accepted this with the grace of someone who had learned that unsatisfying, honest answers were worth more than comfortable ones. She helped clear the table and then went to do the morning barn work, and Noah followed her because he followed Lily everywhere in the mornings. which was its own form of loyalty. Clara washed the dishes and waited. Tit. He came back closer to 2 in the afternoon than to midday. She knew from the sound of the horse something unhurried in it, not the tight-reined rhythm of a man who had been in a fight and was still processing it. When he came through the door, he looked tired, but not the bad kind of tired. The tired that comes after you've done a thing that took effort and the effort is now behind you. He hung his coat. He sat at the table. She put coffee in front of him. Patterson, he said, has agreed to hold the note through spring without renegotiating the terms. She sat down across from him. How? I showed him the accounts, the actual numbers, not the ones from last year, the ones from the last 6 weeks. He wrapped his hands around the cup. The difference was significant enough that he paid attention. A pause. I also told him that the woman running my household was the reason for the difference, and that anyone who had opinions about her presence was welcome to explain those opinions to me directly. How did he take that? He took it the way Patterson takes everything, carefully and without committing himself. Ethan's mouth moved, but he shook my hand when I left, which he didn't do last time. Clara looked at her own coffee. And the rest of it? The town. He was quiet for a moment. I stopped at the feed store, talked to Haggerty, who talks to everyone. I said what needed to be said clearly enough that by tomorrow it'll have moved through Orrin Flats the same way everything moves through Orrin Flats. He looked at her. I said you were the reason my children were in good health and my ranch was solvent, and that was the end of the discussion as far as I was concerned. It was not a declaration. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of thing that when a man said it in a small town, it meant something real, because small towns ran on economy of statement. A man who used few words to say a thing meant it more than a man who used many. Thank you, Clara said. You don't need to thank me. I should have said it weeks ago. He drank his coffee. Marcus called it complicated. Patterson was more polite about it. Haggerty said, and I'm quoting him directly, "About time, Calloway." She laughed. A short, real sound that surprised her a little. Ethan looked at her when she laughed, the way he sometimes did, like he was storing the sound of it somewhere. Lily was worried, Clara said. I know. I'll talk to her. He turned his cup. She worries about things she shouldn't have to worry about. She's been carrying it a long time. I know that too. He said it with the specific flatness of a man who has been knowing something and living with the knowing. I'm trying to make it easier. I'm not always good at it. You're getting better at it, Clara said. The children see it. He looked at her across the table. Do they? Noah told me last week that you stayed up with him when he had that bad dream. He said you were there when he woke up, and you didn't leave until he fell back asleep. She paused. He mentioned it the same way he mentions important facts, like it was a fixed point. Ethan looked at the table. He didn't say anything, but something in his face shifted in the way things shift when you find out that a thing you did in the dark was seen. I didn't know he'd say something, he said. He says everything, Clara said. You know that. The corner of his mouth moved again. I do know that. December arrived. The way December arrived on the high frontier, without apology, without gradual introduction, just the temperature dropping one morning and not coming back up. The ground froze. The sky went the particular flat white of a sky that was deciding what to do next. Clara had been at the Calloway Ranch for 6 weeks. The change in that time was the kind of change that was hard to see when you were inside it, but would have been dramatic to anyone who had stood in the kitchen doorway 6 weeks ago and stood in it again now. The kitchen was stocked, the horses were solid and healthy, the fence line held. Ethan had managed to bring in 8 head of cattle he'd had grazing at a neighbor's leased pasture. The arrangement finally settled after weeks of back and forth that had required the kind of negotiation Clara had watched him conduct from the periphery. Patient and precise, and better at it than he gave himself credit for. Lily had started sleeping later. This was the thing Clara marked most privately, without comment. This single shift in a child who had been waking before dawn out of the habit of needing to be ahead of whatever was going to go wrong. The extra hour in the morning was the truest measure of what had changed, because it meant that on some level, Lily had decided the morning could be managed without her being first up to meet it. Noah had found 3 more rocks of significance and organized them on the windowsill by a criterion he explained at length and which Clara still couldn't entirely follow. He had also in the past 2 weeks started reaching for her hand when they were walking between the house and the barn. Not every time, but often enough that she'd stopped being surprised by it and had started simply leaving her hand available at her side. She was thinking about none of this on the morning of the 9th of December. She was thinking about bread. She had been running low on the good flour, the finer milled flour she used for the lighter loaves, and she had stretched it as far as it would go, and this morning's loaves were going to have to be the coarser grain, which was perfectly fine, but which required a different approach to the dough. She was working through this in her head, sleeves rolled up, hands not yet in anything, when she noticed something wrong. Not wrong like a crisis. Wrong like a small, persistent thing she'd been aware of at the edge of attention for a day or two and hadn't named yet. A heaviness in her chest that she'd been attributing to the cold, a soreness in her throat she'd been ignoring, a certain reluctance in her body that morning when she got up that was different from ordinary tiredness. She shook it off and made the bread. By midday, she knew it wasn't nothing. She finished what she was doing first. This was simply the way she was built, finishing things, not putting them down mid-task. And then she told Lily quietly that she wasn't feeling well and was going to lie down for a while. And Lily, who had been watching her for the past hour with the calibrated attention of a child who had watched a parent get sick and knew the early signs, said, "I know. I've been watching you." "I'm fine," Clara said. "You're not," Lily said. "Sit down." Clara sat because her body was making a reasonably compelling argument for it. "I'll make the soup," Lily said. "You don't need to—" "I know how," Lily said. "You taught me." She had taught her a few weeks back, working side by side in the kitchen on a cold afternoon when there wasn't anything pressing outdoors. Lily had paid close attention in the way she paid attention to everything, filing each step away in that organized, practical mind. Claire had noted at the time that she was a natural, not because cooking is difficult, but because patience is, and Lily had patience in the careful, deliberate way of someone who had learned it young. "All right," Clara said. She went to her room and lay down, and the ceiling of the small room looked back at her, and she thought, "This is inconvenient timing." That was her main feeling about it, not fear, not self-pity, mostly a practical irritation at her own body for choosing this moment, with winter coming on and the ranch needing attention and a family that was just beginning to find its footing. She fell asleep before she finished the thought. The fever came in this night. She knew it the way you know it. The cold that isn't cold, the heat underneath the cold, the particular unreality of a feverish consciousness that makes the room seem farther away than it is. She was aware at some point of the door opening and light from the hall, and then Ethan's voice saying something she didn't quite catch, and then the sound of him moving around the room, and then something, a blanket, another blanket, being settled over her. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out wrong, too thick. "No, you're not," he said, using Lily's words back at her without knowing it. "Don't talk. The morning bread is not your problem right now," he said. She wanted to argue, but her body was no longer cooperating with the part of her that wanted to argue. She heard him go out and come back. She heard water, a bowl, a cloth, the specific sequence of sounds you make when you're trying to bring someone's fever down. The cloth on her forehead was cold, and she didn't object to it. "How long has it been coming on?" he asked. "Day or two," she said. A pause that had something in it. "You didn't say anything." "I thought it was the cold." Another pause. "Did you?" She didn't answer because she hadn't thought it was the cold. Not really. And lying was more effort than it was worth. She had not said anything because saying "I'm not feeling well" felt, in the life she'd led, like an invitation for the situation to become about her in a way she had always been reluctant to allow. "Sleep," Ethan said. She slept. The next 3 days were disjointed in the way illness makes time disjointed, full of stretches she remembered clearly and stretches she didn't, with no reliable way to tell which were which. The fever broke once and came back and broke again more finally on the 3rd day, leaving her wrung out and hollow and alive, which was the important part. She was aware throughout of being taken care of, not in a general sense, specifically. Ethan brought broth in the evenings, made himself, which she could tell from the taste was adequate and earnest, the broth of a man who had followed instructions carefully rather than improvised. Lily came in the mornings and changed the cloth on her forehead with a competence and seriousness that made Clara's chest ache in the way it had been aching since the first day she'd watched this child manage things too large for her. Noah came in the afternoons and sat on the floor beside her cot and talked, not requiring her to respond, filling the room with his running monologue about the rocks, and Bess and a bird he'd seen that had an unusual quality of stubbornness, which he respected. On the second afternoon, during one of the clearer stretches, she looked at him sitting on the floor with his wooden horse and said, "You don't have to stay." He looked up. "I know," he said. "I want to." "You'll get cold." "I brought my blanket," he said, and showed her the blanket he had apparently dragged in from somewhere and arranged on the floor with the specific competence of a 6-year-old who had decided on a plan and executed it. She looked at him for a moment, this small, serious, enormously perceptive person, and thought about what he had said weeks ago, about his mother's face getting blurry, about the soap with the yellow box. "Noah," she said. "Yeah." "Are you all right?" He considered this with his customary seriousness. "I'm all right," he said. "I don't like it when people are sick, but you're going to get better." "I am," she said. "I know," he said. "Because Lily said so, and Lily's usually right." He turned his wooden horse over. "And because I asked Bess, and Bess seemed fine about it." Clara closed her eyes. Her chest hurt, but not from illness. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome, Shaum," he said, and went back to his blanket on the floor, and stayed until Lily came to collect him for dinner, at which point he went without argument because Lily asked, and not because he was told, which was its own small evolution. Ethan came in on the third evening after the fever had finally broken to find her sitting up. He stopped in the doorway. "You shouldn't be—" "I'm sitting," she said, not running a fence line. He came in anyway and stood near the cot with the specific hovering energy of a man who wanted to do something useful and wasn't sure what it was. She recognized the energy. She had felt it herself, from the other side. "The broth was good," she said. "Lily improved it," he said. "I suspected." She looked at her hands. "How is the ranch?" "Fine." "The horses?" "Fine, Clara." She looked at him. He was leaning against the wall now, arms crossed, watching her with the expression she'd come to know meant he was working toward saying something. "You scared me," he said. Not accusation, not complaint, just the plain statement of a fact he was offering because he'd decided to offer it. "I scared myself a little," she said. "Not much, but some." "You should have said something when it was starting." "I know." "You take care of everyone else in this house," he said. "You're allowed to—" He stopped, started again. "You're allowed to let it go the other direction sometimes." She looked at him. The lamplight in the small room made his face look more tired than usual, the tiredness of 3 nights of interrupted sleep, and she was not unmoved by that. "I'm not good at that," she said. "I know. Neither am I." He pushed off the wall, came and sat on the chair that had been pulled up beside her cot. She hadn't been aware until now of the chair being there, which meant someone had put it there for sitting beside her, and the someone was almost certainly him. "We're a pair." "We are," she said. He looked at his hands. "Clara." "Yes." "I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it the way I mean it, not the way it's going to come out." She waited. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Permanently, not as—" He worked through the words. "Not as paid help, not as temporary, permanently." He looked at her. "I'm asking you to be part of this family. However that looks to you, whatever that means to you, I'm not asking you to be anything you don't want to be, but I want you to stay." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't need your name," she said. "I want you to understand that. I've been clear about what I'm worth without it, and I'm not looking for a legal arrangement to prove the point." "I know that," he said. "That's not what I'm offering. I'm offering—" He exhaled. I'm offering this house and these children and whatever I can build here as a place that is yours. Not borrowed. Yours. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Harlan and Aldous Prentice and the door that had closed with that soft, final click. She thought about the road west and the cold and the sound of a child crying through a dark window. She thought about what she'd told Lily on the roof and what she'd said to Marcus and what she'd known standing at the kitchen stove on that first evening when the bread wasn't done yet and Ethan had said, "You'll stay for the bread." She had stayed for the bread, and then for the children, and then for the work, and then for something she hadn't had a name for and now might. "I'll stay," she said. He let out a breath. Something in his whole body shifted, a settling, like land after a long dry spell, absorbing the first real rain. "Good," he said. He said it simply and meant it enormously. "I have conditions," she said. He almost smiled. "Of course you do. The ranch decisions get made together. I'm not an employee and I'm not invisible." "Agreed." "Lily gets to go back to being 11. Chores are chores, not management. She does her share and no more than her share." "Agreed." "Noah gets a dog." He blinked. "Where did that come from?" "He needs something that's his," Clara said. "The rocks and the wooden horse are good, but a dog would be better. Something that follows him the way he follows Lily." Ethan looked at her with the expression of a man who was being outmaneuvered and wasn't sure he minded. "I'll see what I can find." "Those are my conditions," she said. "They're reasonable conditions." "I know they are." He stood up. He looked at her for a moment in the lamplight with his arms at his sides and an expression on his face she hadn't seen before and couldn't have precisely named, the expression of a man looking at something he'd stopped believing he would have again and now had to reckon with the reality of it being there. "Get some sleep," he said. "I've been sleeping for 3 days." "Sleep more," he said, and went out. She lay back and looked at the ceiling and heard from the front of the house the sounds of the evening. Lily's voice and Noah's, the creak of the floor under Ethan's boots, the wind outside doing what the wind did. All of it familiar now, all of it identifiable in a way that the sounds of a place become when you have lived inside them long enough. She was not a sentimental woman. She did not cry. But she lay in the small room that had been a storage room and felt it as what it was, her room, in her house, with her people on the other side of the wall, and she thought, so this is what this feels like. She had forgotten, or perhaps she had never known it in quite this form, earned in quite this way. She knew it now. Lily found out about the conversation the next morning, not because anyone told her. Clara suspected she had simply done what Lily did, which was pay attention to the quality of the air in the house and draw conclusions. The air that morning was different. Ethan moved through the kitchen with something less tight in him, and when he said good morning to Clara, it had a different register, and Lily sat at the breakfast table looking at the two of them in turn with an expression that was assembling information. She waited until Ethan had gone out. Then she said, "Something happened." "Your father and I had a conversation," Clara said. "What kind?" "The kind where he asked me to stay and I said yes." Lily was quiet. Clara continued making breakfast, letting her sit with it. "Permanently," Lily said. "That's the plan." Another silence. Clara set the plates out and sat down and looked at Lily across the table. Lily was looking at her own hands, her jaw working slightly, that particular motion she made when she was processing something too large to process quickly. "Are you all right with that?" Clara asked. Lily stopped. "Yes," she said. She stopped again, looked up. "I need you to know that I know you're not her." "I know," Clara said. "I'm not going to pretend," Lily said. "I'm not going to call you. I'm not going to pretend it's the same." "I don't want you to pretend anything," Clara said. "I want you to call me Clara because that's my name. I want you to tell me when something's wrong because I'll want to know. I want you to go be 11. She paused. "That's all I want from you." Lily looked at her for a long moment. In that look was something Clara had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. Not the acceptance of a replacement, nothing like that, but the acceptance of a thing that was its own thing, new and specific and theirs. "Okay, Lily said. The same words she'd said on the roof. Same tone, small and certain, not a concession, but a decision. Noah came down the stairs and looked at both of them and said, "Why does everything feel different?" "It doesn't," Lily said. "It does," he said, with his usual confidence in his own perceptions. He sat down and looked at his plate. "Did something happen?" "Clara's staying," Lily said. Noah looked at Clara. "I thought she was already staying." "More officially now," Clara said. He thought about this for a moment, then appeared to decide it wasn't significantly new information since it matched what he had already believed to be the case, and applied himself to his breakfast. Clara looked at Lily. Lily looked at Clara. And between them, in the ordinary morning light of the kitchen, something settled that had been unsettled for a long time. Not with ceremony, not with any particular drama, but with the specific quiet of a thing that has found the place it was always going to be. Outside, the snow that had been threatening since morning finally made up its mind and started to come down. Slow at first, then steadier, covering the yard and the fence line and the fields beyond in the particular silence that snow makes, the silence of the world being remade 1 inch at a time. Inside the kitchen was warm. The fire held. The bread was in the oven. The family was at the table. That was everything. That was genuinely, completely everything. The snow that started the morning after Clara's fever broke did not stop for 4 days. It was not the worst winter storm the territory had seen. Anyone who had been in Wyoming longer than 5 years could tell you stories that made this one sound modest. But it was enough. It covered the fence lines. It buried the water trough twice. It made the road to Orin Flats impassable for 3 days and turned the ranch into its own small world, contained and specific, with no traffic in or out. Clara spent those 4 days doing what she always did, which was the work that was in front of her. Bread in the mornings, the accounts in the afternoons, which Ethan had asked her to look at, and which she had been quietly reorganizing since her fever cleared, not changing his numbers but arranging them so the picture they made was clearer. In the evening, she sat with the children, Noah with his rocks and Lily with her primer. And she listened to Ethan move around the house with the settled quality he had taken on since their conversation. A man who had put something down that he'd been carrying and was still adjusting to the difference in weight. On the second snowed-in evening, Lily looked up from her reading and said, "I want to learn the accounts." Clara looked at her. "How much do you know already?" "Addition and subtraction, some multiplication." She was matter-of-fact about it. "I've looked at the ledger before. I could mostly follow it." "What didn't you follow?" "The cattle valuations. How you know what a head is worth when the price changes." Clara moved the lamp between them and opened the ledger. They sat at the table for 2 hours while the snow pressed against the windows. And Clara explained what she knew about the cattle market. Not everything. She didn't know everything, but the logic of it. The way supply and season and distance to market interacted with the price a rancher could expect. Lily asked precise, uncomfortable questions, the kind that revealed she'd been thinking about these things for longer than anyone had given her credit for. At one point, Ethan came to the doorway and saw them bent over the ledger together and stayed there for a moment without saying anything. "She wants to learn the accounts," Clara said, not looking up. "I heard." A pause. "She's 11. "I know how old she is," Clara said. "She asked. I'm teaching her." He made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been the sound of a man who had just realized that the education of his daughter had been happening in the margins of evening hours without him organizing it, and who wasn't sure how he felt about that, and who decided he felt fine about it. "Don't stay up too late, but," he said to both of them, and went back to wherever he'd been. Lily watched him go, then she looked at the ledger and said, "He worries about me." "Yes," Clara said. "He didn't used to show it." "He's learning," Clara said. Lily turned the ledger page. "So am I," she said. And they went back to the numbers. Marcus came back in late January. This time he wrote ahead, a letter that arrived with the supply wagon when the road finally cleared after Christmas, saying he intended to pass through on his way south and would stop if Ethan was amenable. The phrasing of it was careful in the way that Marcus's communication was always careful, but the fact of asking rather than simply arriving meant something. Ethan read the letter twice and said he was amenable. Clara made no particular preparation. She cooked what she would have cooked. She kept the house as it was. She was not going to perform anything for Marcus Calloway's assessment. He came on a Tuesday afternoon in the third week of January, riding in from the North Road this time, and tied his horse at the post the same way he had before. But he stood in the yard for a moment before coming to the door, looking at the ranch, at the fence line that had held through 2 months of hard winter, at the horses that were in proper condition, at the smoke coming from the chimney that indicated a house that was warm and functioning. Clara saw him from the window. He was taking inventory the same way she had taken inventory of the ranch on that first night, and the inventory was coming out differently than the last one. He knocked this time. She answered. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "Come in." He came in. The kitchen was warm. Bread was cooling on the rack. Noah was at the table with his current rock project. He had moved beyond classification and was now attempting to teach Lily to identify rock types by texture, which Lily was tolerating with the patience of someone who had decided it mattered because it mattered to him. Lily looked up when Marcus came in and gave him a careful nod. Noah looked up, looked at his uncle, and said, "Do you know what kind of rock this is?" Marcus looked at the rock being held toward him. "I don't," he said. "Sedimentary," Noah said. "You can tell by the layers. Clara taught me." He set the rock back down with the authority of someone filing information correctly. Something moved through Marcus's face. He looked at Clara. She went back to the stove. Ethan came in from outside 10 minutes later, still in his coat, and stopped when he saw his brother. The two men regarded each other with the complicated regard of brothers who had argued and not quite resolved it and were now navigating the unresolved territory. "Marcus," Ethan said. "You look better than last time," Marcus said. "I feel better than last time," Ethan said simply. He took off his coat, sat at the table. "Sit down." Clara made bread. Marcus sat. Clara cut bread and set it on the table and poured coffee and sat at the far end, because she was part of this household and she was not going to absent herself to make anyone comfortable, but she was also not going to insert herself into what the two brothers needed to work out. The conversation moved through the ordinary things first: the county, the cattle market, a legal matter Marcus had been handling involving a land dispute on the eastern side of the valley that had implications for several neighboring ranches, including the Calloway spread. Ethan listened with the focused attention he brought to anything involving the ranch's interests, asking questions that were sharp and precise. Marcus answered them with the same precision. Whatever had been between them before, they were both smart men, and their intelligence worked well together when they weren't working against each other. It was during a pause while Clara was refilling cups that Marcus said, "The place looks well." "It is well," Ethan said. Marcus looked at the bread, at the children, at the clean kitchen and the full wood box and the accounts ledger on the corner desk that Clara had been keeping in a different hand than Ethan's, but both hands visible, two people working on the same thing. "I said things last time," Marcus said, "about the arrangement." "You did," Ethan said. "I was looking at the wrong things." Marcus said it without particular emotion, but without flinching from it either. "I was looking at what it looked like from the outside. I wasn't looking at—" He gestured, a small movement that took in the kitchen, the children, the bread, all of it. "This." Ethan looked at his brother for a long moment. "That's the most useful thing you've ever said to me," Ethan said. Marcus looked at Clara. She was at the counter, and she met his eyes. "I was wrong," he said, and he said it directly to her, not to the room. "I told you that you were complicating things. I had that backwards." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "You did." He nodded. It was not a comfortable moment for him, and he didn't try to make it one. She respected that. "The children are thriving," he said. "They are," she said. "And the ranch is solvent," she said. "The note through spring, then a real reassessment in April when we know what the cattle will bring." She paused. "We're considering 2 more pastures on the eastern side if the land dispute resolution goes the way Ethan thinks it might." Marcus looked at Ethan. "You're considering expansion." "Clara ran the numbers," Ethan said. "The numbers say it's possible." "I'd want to see the numbers," Marcus said. "I'll show you after dinner," Clara said. He looked at her with an expression that was recalibrating still, doing the slow work of revising a person he thought he'd already assessed. She let him do it. She wasn't interested in being gracious about his being wrong. She wasn't that generous. But she was interested in the ranch, and if Marcus's legal knowledge could help with the eastern pasture situation, she was willing to be practical about it. After dinner, then, he said. Noah, who had been listening to this entire exchange with the concentrated attention of a child who understands more than adults expect, said, "Are you going to be mean again?" "Noah," Lily said. "I'm asking," Noah said. Marcus looked at his nephew. The boy looked back at him with the specific, unflinching directness of someone who had not yet learned to soften inconvenient questions. "No," Marcus said. "I'm not." Noah considered this. "Okay," he said, and went back to his rocks. So, February brought a stretch of brutal cold, followed by a brief false thaw, followed by more brutal cold, and through all of it, the Callaway Ranch ran the way a thing runs when it has been organized by someone who plans ahead. The wood was in. The feed was stored. The animals were tended on a schedule that meant no one was scrambling. Ethan hired a ranch hand in February, a quiet man named Del Shorter who came with a recommendation from Haggerty at the feed store and who turned out to be reliable in the way that unobtrusive people sometimes are, doing what needed doing without requiring management. His presence meant Ethan could spend more time on the decisions that needed his attention rather than every hour on the labor, and the difference showed in him, in his sleep, in the color that came back to his face, in the fact that he sometimes came in from the day's work and sat at the table and talked. Just talked. About the ranch, about what he was thinking, about Dell's opinion on the East pasture, and what Marcus had said in his last letter about the land dispute progress. Clara listened and responded and offered her own opinions, which Ethan took seriously in the straightforward way of a man who had decided that her judgment was worth the taking seriously and wasn't self-conscious about it. They were not a perfect arrangement. She wanted to be clear about that, even to herself. Ethan was still a man who went quiet when things were hard and had to be drawn out with patience she didn't always have in surplus. She was still a woman who had trouble asking for help and had to remind herself regularly that allowing someone to help her was not the same as admitting she couldn't manage. There were evenings when the accumulated weight of everything, the work, the winter, the long tail of grief that ran through the house even now, made the kitchen feel small and the silences feel heavy. There were mornings when she was tired in the bone-deep way and didn't want to be good at anything. Those mornings happened. She got up anyway. So did he. That was, she had come to believe, what it actually meant to build something together. Not the grace of it, but the persistence of it, the choosing to get up and try again on the days when the trying was hardest. In March, Lily did something Clara hadn't expected. She brought home a school primer from Mrs. Greer. Not for herself, but for Noah. A first reader, the kind used for children just starting. She set it on the table and said to Clara, "He needs to learn to read properly. He knows some letters, but not enough." Clara looked at the primer, then at Lily. "You're going to teach him." "We're going to teach him," Lily said. "I don't know how to teach. I know how to do the thing, not how to explain it." "That's most of teaching," Clara said. "You learn the explaining as you go." Lily pressed her mouth together. "Will you help?" "Yes," Clara said, "but you're leading it." Lily looked uncertain in a way she rarely let herself look. "What if I do it wrong?" "Then you do it wrong and you figure out what was wrong and you do it better next time." Clara met her eyes. "That's how it works. There's no other way." Lily took the primer. She went to find Noah. What followed was some of the most entertaining theater Clara had witnessed in years. Lily, patient and methodical, Noah cooperative for approximately 7 minutes before his attention wandered to the texture of the table or a sound outside or a thought he needed to share about his most recent rock. Lily redirecting him with a firmness that was remarkably like the firmness Clara used on the bread dough, persistent and calm, and not allowing the thing to go where it wanted to go instead of where it needed to. Within 2 weeks, he could reliably read 12 words. Within a month, it was 30. He approached each new word with the same seriousness he brought to rock identification, adding it to an internal catalog that Clara suspected was organized in ways only he fully understood. One evening, she walked into the front room and found him sitting in the chair nearest the lamp, the primer open on his lap, sounding out words in a low, concentrated voice. Not asking for help, just doing it. She stood in the doorway for a moment and watched him, and felt the particular full-chest feeling that has no good name. Not quite pride, because he wasn't hers in the legal sense. Not quite love in the simple sense, something in between that was its own true thing. She went back to the kitchen without disturbing him. April came in uncertain, the way spring always came to the high country. Warm one day, snow flurries the next. The mud of the yard going through daily cycles of freezing and thawing that made every trip to the barn an exercise in balance. But underneath the uncertainty, the land was doing what it did. The first pale green was showing in the low spots of the east pasture. The cattle that had wintered were coming through in reasonable condition. The creek that ran along the north edge of the property was running clear and full. Ethan and Clara sat at the table on the first genuinely warm evening of the month and went through the full accounts together. Not just the winter costs, but the position they were in looking forward. The cattle prices Dell had gotten information on from a man who'd come through from the county seat. The eastern pasture possibility that Marcus's letter had indicated was closer to resolved than it had seemed in January. The numbers were not comfortable. They were not going to be comfortable for another full year, maybe 2, if the summer was dry. But they were real numbers, not the numbers of a ranch in free fall. They were the numbers of a place that was still standing and knew what it needed to do. 2 years, Ethan said, if we don't have another drought year, if the eastern pasture comes through and we can graze another 12 head. 2 years is manageable, Clara said. 2 years is a long time. It's also a short time, she said, depending on where you're standing. He looked at her across the table. The lamp between them made the numbers on the pages look less severe than they were, which was probably a kindness. Where are you standing? He said. Right here, she said. Same as you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been thinking about what you said back in December, about not needing the name. She waited. I understood what you meant, he said, and I'm not going to argue with it. He looked at his hands on the table. But I want you to know that the offer stands. Whatever you decide, the offer stands. Not because the town needs it, or Marcus needs it, or anyone else needs it. He looked at her. Because I want you to have it, if you want it. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what she'd believed when she'd said that she knew her worth without a legal document confirming it, that she wasn't interested in being tucked under a man's name the way you tuck something away for storage. She still believed it. Her worth was not something that required the name to establish. But there was a difference she had come to understand over these months between not needing something and not wanting it. The name wouldn't create her place here. She had already built her place here, the way she'd built everything in her life, with her hands and her time and her specific stubborn self. But the name was Ethan saying, this is permanent, this is not tenancy, this is yours. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded. It was the right answer for him. He was not a man who needed things resolved immediately, and he had learned to trust that when she said she would think about something, she would actually think about it and tell him what she decided. One thing at a time, she said. The cattle first. He almost smiled. The cattle first, he agreed. They went back to the accounts. Quote, the answer came not from a dramatic moment or a long deliberation, but from a Tuesday morning in May when Noah came downstairs with his primer tucked under his arm and a new rock in his pocket and sat at the breakfast table and said, without preamble, can I call you Mama Clara? The kitchen went still. Lily, who was at the counter, turned around. Ethan, who was coming through the back door, stopped. Noah looked at Clara with his enormous, straightforward eyes, waiting for an answer with the patience of someone who has asked a reasonable question and expects a reasonable response. Clara set down the spoon she was holding. She had promised herself she would not make this into something larger than it was, and she made herself hold to that. The boy was 6, now nearly 7, and he had come to a conclusion in his own time, in his own way, and he was asking a straightforward question, and he deserved a straightforward answer. Yes, she said, you can. He nodded, satisfied, and opened his primer. Lily was still looking at her from the counter. Her expression was complicated in the way that only Lily's expressions could be complicated, multiple things moving at once beneath a controlled surface. Then she said, quietly, not to Noah, not quite to the room, I'm not ready for that. Not yet. I know, Clara said. You don't have to be. But I'm... I'm glad he is. Lily looked at her brother and then back at Clara. I want you to know that. I do know, Clara said. Ethan came fully inside and closed the door. He looked at his daughter and his son and the woman at his stove, and he said nothing because there was nothing that needed to be said. And he knew that, and the knowing of it, the understanding of when silence was right, was something he had learned over these months, alongside everything else. He sat at the table. Clara put breakfast in front of him. Mama Clara, Noah said, testing the sound of it, apparently finding it satisfactory. Pass the salt, please. She passed the salt. That was that. On the 15th of May, Clara Whitmore became Clara Calloway. There was no ceremony to speak of. Ethan had asked, and she had in the end said yes, not because she needed the name, but because she had decided she wanted it, which was a different thing, and one she could stand behind without compromising anything she believed about herself. The justice of the peace in Orrin Flats was a dry, efficient man named Birch, who got through the necessary words in under 10 minutes and shook both their hands with the businesslike satisfaction of a man who had done a job cleanly. Lily stood to Clara's left. Noah stood to Ethan's right and spent part of the ceremony examining a rock he had found in the street outside, which was exactly right and which Clara would have changed nothing about. Haggerty from the feed store was there, having invited himself in the cheerful way of a man who understands his own role in community events. Mrs. Greer came, which surprised Clara and touched her more than she let on. Del Shorter stood in the back with his hat in his hands and left immediately after to get back to the animals, which was exactly what Del would do. Doris Shefford was not there. Clara noted this without any particular feeling about it. Not every change situation required every person in it to acknowledge the change. Some people's opinions simply ceased to be relevant without requiring a formal ceremony of their own. On the ride back to the ranch, Noah fell asleep against Clara's side in the wagon with the completeness of a child who has run out of day, and she sat with his weight against her and watched the land go by. The spring grass coming up full and green in the low places, the mountains still holding snow at their peaks, the road winding through the valley that was the world they lived in now. Ethan drove. Lily sat on his other side, looking at the country with the expression she'd been wearing more often lately. Not the braced, preemptive readiness of a child managing the next crisis, but the more ordinary expression of a girl who was simply looking at the world and finding it mostly acceptable. 2 years, Clara said. Ethan glanced at her. 2 years. We'll be past the hard part by then. Probably, he said. Something else will have gone wrong by then. Yes, she said. Probably. He said it without bitterness, and she heard it without bitterness, and that was itself a measure of something. That they could look at the likelihood of things going wrong and name it plainly without it becoming a reason for despair. The ranch would have hard years ahead. There would be seasons that didn't cooperate, and cattle that didn't thrive, and mornings when the numbers on the page were not encouraging. That was what it was to be in a place, to be committed to a place, to have decided that a particular patch of earth and the people on it were worth the years it cost to stay. She had paid years into things before that hadn't held, into a town that had never decided to accept her, into a marriage that had been good but brief, into a life that had been adequate until it wasn't. She did not think about those years as wasted. They had made her who she was, given her the skills and the hardness and the specific quality of persistence that had carried her west on a freezing road with $43 and a skillet. Without all of it, she would not have heard a child crying through a dark window and gone toward it instead of away. You could not always know, when you were in the middle of losing something, that what you were losing was also a door. You could not always see, walking out of a town that had decided you were not worth the effort, that the road beyond it was going to take you somewhere you were actually meant to be. She had not known any of that. She had simply kept walking. That was the whole of it. That was the only wisdom she had that was actually worth anything. Not the cooking, not the accounting, not the ability to fix things or organize things or run a household that had been in free fall. Those were skills. The wisdom underneath them was simpler. When you have nothing to go back to, you go forward. You go forward and you stay open to what the road puts in front of you. And sometimes what it puts in front of you is a broken gate and a dark house, and the sound of a child who needs someone. You go toward the sound, Noah shifted against her side in his sleep and made a small sound, and then settled, his hand finding her arm and closing around it in the unconscious way of sleeping children, holding on without knowing they're holding on. She put her free hand over his. Jean. Marcus came for the summer roundup in July. He was different in the way that people are different when they have revised their opinion of a situation and stopped arguing with the revision. He worked alongside Dell and Ethan for 3 days. He had grown up on a ranch before law had taken him elsewhere, and the knowledge came back in his hands, even if his body wasn't quite as accustomed to it. He ate at the table with the family in the evenings and talked about the land dispute, which had resolved in the Callaway Ranch's favor well enough to make the eastern pasture a real possibility for next spring. On the last evening of his visit, he found Clara in the kitchen after the children had gone to bed, going through the accounts for the quarter. He sat across from her without being invited and looked at what she was working on and said, "Can I see?" She pushed the ledger toward him. He looked through it for a while. She went back to her own notes. The lamp burned between them. "You've changed the organizational structure," he said. "The old structure made it harder to see where the losses were coming from," she said. "This way, you can see the pattern." He looked at another page. "Where did you learn this?" "My father's ranch, and then trial and error." She looked up. Mostly trial and error. He closed the ledger. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "My brother spent 2 years nearly losing this place. I've spent 2 years telling him what to do about it." He looked at the closed ledger. "You spent 7 months and fixed it." "I didn't fix it," she said. "It's not fixed. It's stable, which is different." "You know what I mean." "I do," she said, "but I want to be accurate about it. Stable means it still requires the work. It's not fixed like something that's done." He looked at her with the same recalibrating expression she had seen in January. "You're not what I thought you were," he said. "No," she said. "I'm not." "I was looking at what you looked like," he said, "not what you were." "Most people do." "I shouldn't have." She looked at him across the table. He was not a bad man. She had known that even in November when he'd been working against her. He was a man who loved his brother and had been watching his brother suffer for 2 years and had reached for the explanations that were available to him. And the explanation he'd reached for had been wrong. That happened to people who loved other people. It did not make them bad. It made them human, which was its own complicated condition. "You came back," she said. "That's something." He looked slightly uncomfortable, which she understood was as close as Marcus Callaway came to contrite. "Ethan seems—" He searched for the word. "Like himself again. The version before." "Not before," she said. "That version is gone. He's a different version. Better in some ways, worse in some ways, but not before." She looked at the ledger. "You can't go back to before. You can only build what's next." Marcus sat with that for a moment. "He made a good choice," he said. She wasn't entirely sure whether he meant Ethan's choice to keep the ranch or to ask her to stay, and she didn't ask for clarification. Both were true. That was enough. He left the next morning before breakfast, as he usually did because Marcus was most comfortable when departures were clean. He shook Ethan's hand on the porch and ruffled Noah's hair and said something to Lily that made her nod seriously, the nod she gave when something was worth taking seriously. He looked at Clara and tipped his hat and said, "Mrs. Callaway." "Safe travels, Mr. Callaway," she said. He rode out. Ethan stood on the porch watching him go with the expression of a man who has gotten back something he'd thought was lost, and the getting back of it hadn't undone the losing of it, but had made the space around the loss slightly less cold. "He'll come at Christmas," Ethan said. "Probably," Clara said. "Is that all right?" She considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. "Yes," she said. "It's all right." They went in. Noah learned to read well enough by August that he could get through a full page of the primer without stopping. He did this for the first time on a Wednesday evening, and when he finished, he looked up with the expression of someone who has just discovered that a door they thought was stuck is actually open, and he said, "What's next?" Lily brought him a harder book. He looked at it. He looked at her. "This is harder," he said. That's the point, she said. He opened it. Lily stood back and watched him start. And her face in that moment was the face of someone who was given something they didn't know they had to give, and found that the giving of it made them larger rather than smaller. She caught Clara watching and straightened up slightly, the automatic reflex of a girl who had spent years not wanting to be caught in unguarded moments. Clara said nothing. She turned back to the stove. Some things were better witnessed without comment, better left as the private, real things they were, rather than being made into a lesson or a moment. The summer moved through its work. The cattle drive in late August that brought in better prices than the year before, not good enough to change everything, but good enough to change the tone of the numbers. Del Shorter turned out to be quietly invaluable in the way that some people are, doing more than their job description by some internal ethic that had nothing to do with what they were being paid. Ethan gave him a raise in September, and Del accepted it with the same quiet quality he brought to everything else. The East Pasture lease was signed in October, 12 new head by spring. The fence line on the north held for a full year without needing work. Clara planted a kitchen garden in the spring, and it came through the summer better than she expected. Bess the cow remained opinionated about everything. The horses were well. The ranch was not fixed. It would never be fixed in the sense of being done, because nothing you committed to was ever done. But it was alive in a way it had not been alive when she had pushed open the gate on that freezing November evening. She thought sometimes about the woman who had walked out of Harlan with $43 in a skillet. She thought about her with a complicated feeling that was not quite sympathy and not quite pride and not quite distance. More the feeling of looking at an earlier version of yourself and recognizing her without fully being her anymore. That woman had been right to keep walking. She had been right to knock on the door. She had not known, in the cold and the dark, that what was on the other side of the door was the specific life she was suited for. She had not known anything except that there was a sound and she was going toward it. That was all. That had been enough. On a Saturday morning in October, nearly a full year after Clara had first walked into this kitchen, she was making bread when Lily came in and stood beside her at the counter without being asked. "Can I do the kneading?" Lily said. Clara stepped back. Lily put her hands into the dough and worked it the way she'd been watching Clara work it for a year. The heel of the hand, the push, the quarter turn, the rhythm of it that looked simple until you tried it. Her first attempts were too aggressive, then too tentative. Then she found the middle of it, the press and release that worked with the dough rather than against it. "Like this?" she said. "Like that," Clara said. They stood at the counter together, Lily working the dough and Clara watching, and outside the window the first light of the October morning was coming up over the eastern ridge. In that particular way it came, slow and clear and without ceremony, just the dark becoming less dark, and then the sky finding its color, the country laid out beneath it in all its difficult, beautiful, demanding reality. Noah appeared in the doorway with a rock and with the dog, a medium-sized brown dog of no particular pedigree that Ethan had found in April through a man he knew 20 miles west, who had answered to the name Biscuit with the resigned acceptance of an animal who understood that names were not his to choose. Biscuit went everywhere Noah went, which was everywhere, and this morning he sat in the kitchen doorway beside Noah and looked at the bread with the alert interest of an animal who had learned that bread smelled good. "Is it almost done?" Noah asked. "It hasn't gone in the oven yet," Lily said. "When it goes in the oven, how long?" "Long enough," Lily said, which was exactly what Clara would have said, and Clara recognized in it the particular transmission of a thing that happens not through formal teaching but through proximity and time, and the small daily accumulations of one person watching another do a thing and absorbing it without knowing they're absorbing it. Ethan came in from outside, coat still on, holding a letter. "From Marcus," he said. "He's coming for Christmas." He looked at Clara. "I know," she said. "You don't know, you just said you expected it." "Those are the same thing," she said. He almost smiled. The expression he had that wasn't quite a smile, but was better than one, more specific, more his. He put the letter on the table and took off his coat and came to stand beside her at the counter, looking at Lily working the dough with the focused expression of a girl learning something properly. "She's getting it," he said quietly to Clara. "She's been getting it for a while," Clara said. She just hadn't tried it with her own hands yet. He watched his daughter for a moment. Then he said, equally quietly, "Thank you." She didn't ask what for. She understood what for. She understood that he was thanking her not for any one thing, but for the accumulation of things, for all of it, for the bread and the accounts and the fever and the conversation in December and the name and the years that were building themselves one day at a time into something that would last. "You'd have found your way," she said. "Maybe," he said, "but I wouldn't have found it here, like this."
boat.
She looked at the kitchen, at Lily with her hands in the bread dough, and Noah in the doorway with his rock and his dog, and at Ethan beside her with his shoulder almost touching hers, and the morning coming through the window over the sink, and the fire warming the room, and the smell of everything that would be made from this day and all the days that were still coming. She had not found this place. She had walked into the cold and kept walking and eventually arrived here, which was different from finding. Finding implied you knew what you were looking for. She had not known. She had only known that she had to go forward, and she had gone forward, and the forward had led here. That was the truth of it. Not the clean version, not the version where she had been brave or wise or anything in particular. Just a woman who had nothing left to go back to and so had gone on and on and on until the road put something in front of her worth stopping for. She had stopped. She had stayed. And staying, the daily, imperfect, non-dramatic work of staying, had built everything. "Go wash up," she said to Ethan. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. He went. Lily kept working the dough. Noah explained to Biscuit what bread was, in detail, and Biscuit listened with the earnest attention that was his primary gift. The fire held in the stove. The morning kept coming through the window. Clara Calloway stood in her kitchen and made breakfast for her family, the same as every morning, the same as she would the morning after this and the morning after that. Nothing perfect. Nothing resolved in the clean way of stories that tie themselves up. Just the work and the warmth and the people who were hers, and the day, beginning again, asking only that she show up for it. She had always been good at that. She showed up.